So, good afternoon, alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin. I kept my mouth shut about my opinions regarding Donald Trump's promises to bring us the truth about the New Jersey drone outbreak, UAP crisis, whatever you want to call it. I never thought that we were really going to get much of anything different out of Trump versus what President Biden and that administration had been telling us. I didn't come out and say it because I wanted to give the guy and his administration an opportunity to do the right thing, but unfortunately, we're not getting that, at least not now. The Trump administration has made an official statement about the so-called New Jersey drone outbreak, and they are essentially saying precisely the same thing that the Biden administration said, that these are either drones operating with FAA approval or that they are misidentified aircraft or misidentified planets. There's really nothing different about this statement than the statements that were made before. Now, there are plenty of people right now who are going wild on X saying that, well, yeah, Trump's uncovered the truth, that the FAA always knew that these were licensed drones and they just didn't tell us the truth at the time and created this whole massive crisis unnecessarily. And now Trump has finally revealed that the FAA knew all these things. That's not what the administration is saying at all. They're not making that sort of claim at all, assuming that they're right. Okay, which, by the way, I don't think any of this is accurate, but let's assume that it is. Well, at the time in December, the FAA was investigating a number of reports from eyewitnesses all over the Northeast, indeed in many regions of the country besides just New Jersey, to determine what this so-called drone outbreak was. And at that time, before the investigation was completed, the FAA couldn't make a public statement saying that all of these drones or most of these drones or whatever, most of these objects were drones operating with FAA approval. And now that the investigation is complete, they can definitely say that these are drones operating with permission or misidentified aircraft, misidentified planets. Trust me, guys, there's nothing different about this. I know that there are many enthusiastic Trump supporters who watch my channel, and I know that this is disappointing to you, and so you don't want to admit the truth to yourselves, but here's the raw facts. Trump is not doing anything different, or at least the people that he's appointed to these crucial positions are not doing anything different than their predecessors did, and that comes as no shock to me whatsoever. Why? Well, because Trump was in office before. He was president for 4 years, and during that time didn't seem to uncover any sort of conspiracy, any sort of reverse engineering program, nothing. Now, if the truth was kept from him at that time, if there are secrets to be hidden from the president in those days, well, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that we are going to get the same situation today. Even if Trump is not complicit in the whole objective of covering up the truth about the UFO phenomena, or UAP phenomena, whatever you want to call that, well, his administration most definitely is. Now, a lot of you also may be asking the question right now, people who are not necessarily believers, if we want to call it that, they may be asking, how do I know this? How do I know that the New Jersey drone crisis was something a lot more complicated than what the government is telling us? How do I know that these were not just simply misidentified aircraft, misidentified planets, or drones operating with permission? Well, it's because for anybody who's been following this topic for all the months that it's been in the news, and indeed, speaking as a person who has seen UAPs over U.S. military bases himself, I can tell you with great confidence that this is not all there is to it. It's not this simple. And by the way, a prominent U.S. Air Force whistleblower happens to agree with me. Now, first of all, there's a number of details about this announcement that I think all of you need to be made aware of. This is not an official statement from the FAA, but rather what the administration says the FAA is currently reporting. As far as the FAA themselves are concerned, they are referring all questions to the White House and not commenting about this at all. And just so you know, the FAA is in a state of chaos right now because they don't even have a leader. The administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, Michael Whitaker, resigned from his position on January 20th, immediately after Trump took office, because Elon Musk continued to insist that this man quit, in spite of the fact that the entire Senate approved his appointment back in 2023, because he's been doing some things in terms of fines to SpaceX and restricting Starship launches in ways that Elon hasn't been happy about. And Michael Whitaker apparently saw the writing on the wall and realized that Elon could use his authority now through Trump to get rid of him, so he just resigned. So the FAA actually hasn't made any official statements on this issue whatsoever. It's only been the Trump administration. And here is essentially what was said. Not that this was some kind of big FAA operation with large numbers of approved drones being used for some sort of surveillance purposes or some sort of experiment, but rather just ordinary activity. Quote, after research and study, the drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons. The press secretary for the White House, Carolyn Leavitt, went on to say that the problem got worse because of curiosity, that the drones belong to hobbyists and private citizens as well, and with more people watching, there were more reports. Quote, this was not the enemy, she told reporters. But here's a few reasons that I don't buy this explanation. First of all, we are expected to believe that the FAA authorized these drones to fly over nuclear power plants, or that the FAA authorized these drones to fly in such close proximity to a major airport, New York Stewart International Airport actually, that it had to close its runways for an hour due to drone activity in its airspace. All of this was normal activity and something that the FAA was completely okay with. And once again, if this is something that the FAA always knew about, if these swarms were some sort of massive FAA experiment, as some people are suggesting right now, and the FAA never told us about it, then why was there this joint investigation between the FAA and the FBI and local law enforcement agencies? Why all this effort put into something that the FAA already knew about? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. There's got to be a lot more to this story than we're being told right now, which is precisely the same position we were in when the Biden administration was making statements about this crisis. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. UFO whistleblower Jake Barber, who's an Air Force veteran, somebody who's been in the news quite a bit lately, has had this to say about the president's statement, or rather, the president's press secretary, although I need to emphasize that she said that this information comes directly from Trump, so he's definitely the guy providing the information, at least currently. Jake Barber had this to say, quote, the activity there was not FAA approved. I know firsthand. I was assigned there specifically to look at the debacle from an FAA violation standpoint in order to give information to the FBI. Someone is not presenting the whole story to our new president. And New Jersey State Assemblyman, who by the way has witnessed these objects on a number of occasions, his name is Brian Bergen, he isn't buying it either. Quote, everything in the sky is authorized to be there by the FAA or it wouldn't be in the sky. So I don't understand the response from the White House. The FAA probably had no idea that they were going to be called out like that. And I tend to agree with that, actually. I think it's very possible that the FAA didn't make any formal statement, and instead, the administration just jumped the gun on their conclusions. Bergen went on to say, quote, "I just want somebody normal to get up in front of us and tell us the truth. The straight truth, no canned response, no carefully chosen words, no dancing around it. If it's the FAA doing research, what research? If it's some other entity, whatever other entity it is, we want someone to just be normal for once and give us the truth." Sheriff Mike Mastronardi of Ocean County, New Jersey, said not being upfront at the beginning could cause harm. Quote, "I wish they told us the facts sooner," he said. "The FAA, by not being upfront, could have caused harm." Sheriff Sean Golden in Monmouth County, New Jersey, agrees. Quote, "I think in this day and age, particularly in a post-9/11 era, in an era of threats and risk assessments, when we have an agency withholding information like that and not telling their own federal partners that they were involved in this, not telling state and county and local officials what was happening is really disturbing to me." Well, I agree. As a matter of fact, I think that's irresponsible behavior beyond the range of what could even be reasonably said as being possible. I don't think that it's possible at all that the FAA kept all of this information secret, even from the FBI. Why would they do that? Keep in mind, the FAA is not an intelligence agency. It's not a military organization. It's not an organization that carries out any sort of clandestine activities. So the notion that the FAA was carrying out some sort of research involving swarms of drones for months and hid that information from the FBI, the military, local law enforcement, etc., that whole notion is completely absurd in my opinion. And as I said before, what I think is more likely, although I'm still not buying this either, is that the FAA didn't know exactly what these objects were corresponding to the sightings that had been made. They hadn't investigated the issue thoroughly enough yet, and by the time they investigated all of the reported sightings, the conclusion that they came to is that some of them were drones that were operating with FAA approval, some of them were aircraft that were being misidentified, and some were misidentified planets, which, by the way, is exactly what the Biden administration said about the issue. And again, I'm not buying it. There are far too many sightings of very unusual craft with lights that don't correspond to FAA approved navigation lights. Once again, if these were some sort of FAA research drones, then they would have standardized navigation lights on them. And many of these objects absolutely don't have that. At most, they have a bright strobe light or some sort of searchlight on them, something along those lines, but not the approved FAA navigation lights that any object in the air, especially objects that are traveling inside commercial flight corridors, should have on them. I also absolutely do not subscribe to the notion that the FAA would be carrying out some sort of research, some sort of test flights on experimental drones or something along those lines over nuclear reactors, inside flight corridors that would force international airports to shut down. The FAA doesn't do things like that. It's their job to make sure that accidents don't happen. Accidents like the recent tragedy that took place in Washington, D.C., that's still under investigation by the FAA, that sadly doesn't even have a leader at the moment to direct their activities. Hopefully that's something that's going to change sometime in the very near future. Although, to be clear, I don't believe what the FAA has to tell us about UAPs either. I think that they could very well be involved in covering up some of these details, but nevertheless, I don't believe that the FAA could have done so many blatantly irresponsible things, which would have put not only their reputation, but also their jobs in serious jeopardy. But what about Trump? I mean, is he just not being properly informed, or is he part of the cover-up? Well, Let me tell you something. Although I think it is very possible that the people that Trump appointed into these positions to investigate all of this may be keeping him in the dark, I think he also has a very strong motivation to keep the economy stable and strong. And that's something that could be put at risk with some sort of frightening revelation, like the fact that we're not alone and alien craft or some sort of robotic probe, something along those lines, are traveling through our airspace with impunity and we are powerless to do anything about it. Oh yeah, that reminds me of something. During the investigation, both the FBI and the FAA reported that they were employing electromagnetic and other types of jamming devices designed to bring drones down, and they failed to have any effect on the objects that they were observing. Again, why would they have deployed equipment like this if they always knew about approved craft flying through our skies and there was nothing to be concerned about? And why would their equipment have no effect on ordinary drones that were supposed to be there in the first place? None of this adds up. And the last detail that doesn't add up for me is the fact that I saw many objects flying over RAF Lakenheath that didn't look like drones at all. If anything, they look like the objects that have appeared in this ISS footage that was taken by an astronaut filming the Aurora Borealis. Now, of course, all of these are supposed to be satellites, but let me tell you something. These satellites are all traveling in bizarre trajectories. We're not talking about single constellations of Starlinks here, but rather large numbers of satellites moving in a wide variety of directions, which, by the way, is very similar to what I saw at RAF Lakenheath, except that some of these objects changed direction in mid-flight, which satellites cannot do. In addition to that, I saw one of these objects track across the sky and then hover for a while, at least 10 seconds before it simply disappeared from view. And to be clear, I'm an avid satellite watcher. I enjoy watching the International Space Station on the occasions when it comes over my house. I live in a rural area of the United Kingdom where you get a very clear view of the sky, when it's not cloudy, that is, and I've never seen anything like this in the night sky anyplace else. So to be clear, I believe that the vast majority of what the administration has said about this phenomena is true. I believe the vast majority of the objects that were sighted by eyewitnesses across the Northeast probably were mundane objects like commercial drones or misidentified aircraft or maybe even misidentified planets. But I also believe that there is a minority of these objects that were none of these things, but something far more unusual, and the government still isn't giving us the whole story. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also I'd like you to do one free favor for me, and that is to visit a YouTube channel called The Transporter Room. If you like Star Trek, this is a brand new YouTube channel dedicated to vlogs about Star Trek. A very, very interesting channel that was started by one of my supporters. And by the way, he's also the sponsor of this video, and I guaranteed him that I would get him to at least 300 subscribers. That is a very easy to achieve milestone, guys. I'd really like to help this brand new channel get there because I love these interviews. I love talking about Star Trek, and that's something you're into as well. Please visit the Transporter Room. It's linked in the description, and subscribe. Costs you absolutely nothing to do it, but it would definitely help this fellow out, and he does a lot to help my channel. Thanks again for watching, and as always, stay angry about space.